The moment the bartender ignored her, I realized, some people get overlooked not because they fade, but because the world stops paying attention. It was one of those evenings when the world feels muted, soft rain outside, jazz murmuring through dim speakers, the bar glowing like a tired ember in the dark. I wasn't there for anyone, just a quiet drink, maybe a thought or two to keep me company. But then she walked in. She didn't command the room. She didn't need to. There was something about her stillness, composed, deliberate, and unbothered by being noticed, that made her impossible not to notice. She carried herself like someone who had long outgrown the need to prove anything. The door closed behind her, and for a second, even the rain seemed to hesitate. She took a seat at the counter, 2 stools away from me, and folded her coat neatly on her lap. Not a single wasted motion. The bartender glanced at her, nodded vaguely, and went back to wiping glasses. I waited for him to circle back, but he didn't. Instead, he served 2 loud men at the other end who had arrived after her. She didn't protest, not even a frown, just a quiet sigh and a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her fingers traced the rim of the glass in front of her, one of those absent gestures that carry more weight than words. It wasn't irritation. It was habit, like she was used to being unseen. Something about that hit me harder than I expected. Maybe it was the contrast, her presence so dignified, yet treated like background noise. Maybe it was the way she sat upright, chin slightly lifted, refusing to let disregard diminish her. She wasn't fragile. She was tired of pretending she didn't notice. The light above the counter was warm and low, catching the faint silver strands in her hair. Not age, but grace carved by time. Her perfume drifted across the small space between us. Subtle, woody, and familiar, like cedar after rain. Every sense felt heightened. I could hear the soft rhythm of her breath against the hum of jazz, could feel the weight of her silence. For a moment, I wondered what her story was. What kind of life teaches someone to wait patiently, even when they deserve better? She looked like she belonged somewhere else. A gallery opening, maybe, or a late-night bookstore. Not this dim little bar where people came to forget. I caught myself staring longer than I should have. When she finally turned her head, our eyes met for a second. Just a flicker. But in that flicker was something that silenced every other sound in the room, quiet recognition. The kind 2 strangers share when they both know what it feels like to be overlooked, yet still choose to hold their head high. She looked away, and I knew right then, this wasn't just another night. Something about her presence had shifted the air around me. I didn't know her name, but I knew this. The next thing I said might matter more than any word I'd spoken in a long time. The bartender walked past her again, a towel over his shoulder, a practiced smile reserved for louder guests. He poured drinks for a couple at the far end, laughed at a joke he didn't really hear, then turned his back to her entirely. I waited, expecting him to notice her waiting glass, her patient stillness, but he didn't. Something in me tightened. Maybe it was irritation, maybe just instinct, because it wasn't about the drink anymore. It was about the quiet unfairness of that moment. The way she sat there, invisible under warm light, too gracious to demand attention she had already earned. She shifted slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The movement was small, but it carried years, the kind of motion born from habit, not vanity. I could see the faint line of weariness at the corner of her eyes, the subtle tremor of her fingers against the glass. That was it. I couldn't stay quiet. I leaned forward on my stool, my voice cutting softly through the low music. "Excuse me," I said. My tone wasn't loud, just steady enough to carry. The bartender turned. "She deserves attention." The words weren't rehearsed. They came out more personal than I intended, like I wasn't defending a stranger but something I'd felt myself. That quiet ache of being seen too late. The bartender blinked, then gave a quick nod, muttering an apology as he finally approached her. But she didn't look at him. She looked at me. For a second, I forgot where I was. The noise around us faded into a hum. Her eyes, warm, hazel with hints of gold, found mine with quiet surprise. Not embarrassment, not gratitude in the usual sense. More like, She was studying me, trying to understand why a stranger had decided she mattered. Her lips parted slightly. "You didn't have to," she said, her voice calm but carrying a small tremor that betrayed emotion. "Maybe," I replied, but it felt wrong not to. The corner of her mouth lifted, just enough to soften her whole face. It wasn't a full smile, more like the beginning of one. A spark beneath layers of composure. The bartender returned with her drink, setting it down a bit too quickly. She thanked him politely, but her attention stayed on me. There was something wordless passing between us. A shared understanding, a quiet thread of awareness neither of us could name yet. She took a sip, eyes steady on mine. "You always speak up for strangers?" she asked, teasing but gently. "Only when they forget they're worth being seen," I said before I could stop myself. Her gaze held mine a moment longer, then dropped, and I saw it. That faint, almost imperceptible warmth blooming behind her guarded expression. And in that silence, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses, I realized I hadn't just spoken for her. I'd spoken for both of us. Two people who'd gone unnoticed too long, now caught in a moment that neither of us could look away from. She turned her glass slowly, letting the ice shift and clink against the sides. A quiet rhythm that seemed to fill the pauses between us. I wasn't sure what to say next, and for once, that silence didn't feel awkward. It felt intentional, like the calm that follows a truth spoken out loud. "Thank you," she said finally, her tone gentle but measured. "People don't usually notice moments like that." I smiled faintly. "Maybe they do. They just pretend they don't." Her eyes softened, not out of agreement, but recognition. She glanced down at her drink, a trace of reflection flickering across her expression. The jazz in the background had shifted into something slower, quieter, as if the music itself was leaning closer to listen. She exhaled softly. "You know, it's funny," she said, swirling the liquid in her glass. "When you reach a certain point in life, you stop expecting to be seen. You start blending in, not because you want to, but because it's easier." I leaned in a little, elbows resting on the counter. "And yet here you are," I said, "still walking into places like this, still showing up." That made her smile. A small, tired smile that somehow carried pride. "Maybe that's all any of us can do," she murmured. "Show up and hope someone notices we did." There was no bitterness in her tone, only honesty, the kind that comes from living long enough to stop sugarcoating how things feel. She asked what brought me here. I told her, vaguely, that it had been a long week, too many quiet evenings spent with no one to talk to. That made her laugh softly, the sound warm but lined with disbelief. "You? Too quiet? You just told off a bartender for me." I shrugged. "Doesn't mean I talk much. Just means I notice." Her gaze lifted again, and for the first time, she didn't look away. There was depth there, a mix of curiosity and something unspoken. It wasn't about attraction yet. It was about understanding. That rare moment when two people realize they're made of similar silences. "I used to talk a lot," she said after a pause. "Used to fill every gap in a conversation just so it wouldn't feel empty. But then I realized, sometimes people only listen because they're waiting for their turn to speak." I nodded, understanding more than I could explain. "And when you find someone who actually listens, it feels strange." She smiled again, this time softer, a little sad. "Strange," she repeated. "But nice." For a while we just sat there, the two of us, the dim light, the echo of the music curling around the silence. No grand confessions, no flirtation. Just an invisible thread pulling us closer through understanding alone. When she lifted her glass, her fingers brushed mine, just barely. A whisper of contact that sent a pulse of warmth through my skin. It wasn't intentional, but it was enough to make me realize this wasn't just a passing conversation anymore. Something in her guard had shifted, and something in me wanted to keep it that way. It started with a small mistake, mine. I tried to make a serious point about how the music in that bar always seemed too slow for the people inside it. And in the middle of my thought, my glass slipped from my hand and clinked against hers. Not enough to spill, but enough to break the stillness we'd built. She looked at me, startled first, then amused. And then, out of nowhere, she laughed. Not the polite kind people give to keep things comfortable, but the kind that comes from deep inside, unguarded, involuntary, and almost shy from disuse. The sound startled me more than the glass did. It was warm and low, like the echo of a forgotten melody. For a second, the entire bar faded, and all I could hear was that laugh. "I'm sorry," she said, covering her mouth, still trying to suppress the sound. "I don't know why that was funny." "It's okay," I said, grinning. "You've just proven this place isn't cursed." That earned me another small laugh, the kind that comes from someone remembering what it feels like to let go. And just like that, something between us softened. Not just the mood, but the space itself. The tension, the politeness, the careful tone we'd both been keeping. It cracked open and turned into something lighter, something human. We started talking again, but this time it wasn't careful. It was easy. She told me how she used to visit bars like this after work. Years ago, when she still believed she'd meet people who wanted to talk about books, music, and not just themselves. How she stopped coming when those conversations disappeared. I told her about the first time I walked into this place. Alone, younger, thinking solitude was freedom, only to realize it can become a cage if you stay in it too long. She smiled, stirring the ice in her drink. "You talk like someone who's lived more than his age allows." "And you laugh," I replied. "Like someone who hasn't in a while." That line hung there between us, fragile but true. She didn't argue. She just looked down, lips curved but eyes distant. The air around us felt different. Lighter, yes, but threaded with something else too. That unspoken awareness of two people slowly warming to the presence of each other. When she leaned forward to reach for her drink, her shoulder brushed mine. It wasn't deliberate, but neither of us pulled away. That single, brief contact sent a quiet spark through me. Not of desire, but recognition. The kind that says you're here and I feel it. She didn't move her arm for a moment. Just stayed there, her skin warm against my sleeve. Then she turned to me with that same half-smile. "See? Not cursed." And I remember thinking, maybe it never was. Maybe it just needed someone like her to laugh again. The laughter faded, but its echo lingered between us like a gentle aftertaste. Warm, familiar, and unexpectedly intimate. The air around us had shifted again. Quieter now, but not cold. It was the kind of silence that holds meaning, the space between words that both people feel but neither wants to disturb. She looked down at her drink, fingers tracing the condensation on the glass. The playfulness from a moment ago had softened into something quieter. There was a stillness in her posture. Not discomfort, but reflection. "You know," she said slowly, "people think silence means you've run out of things to say, but sometimes it just means the words aren't enough." I nodded, watching the faint tremble of her hand as she set the glass down. Maybe silence is what's left when the truth feels too heavy to say. She met my gaze, and for the first time tonight, she didn't smile. Her eyes were steady, yet full of something that made my chest tighten. Not sadness exactly, but recognition. The kind that says, "You understand this too, don't you?" For a while, we didn't speak. The sounds of the bar, the soft laughter, the low hum of music, the faint clinking of glasses, became background noise to a moment that felt strangely personal. She leaned back slightly, arms folded, not as a defense but a quiet shield. "I used to think being strong meant not needing anyone," she said. "Turns out, it just meant getting really good at pretending." Her voice cracked just slightly at the end. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that I did. I wanted to say something comforting, but nothing felt right. So instead, I did what she had done earlier. I stayed still, present, letting the moment breathe. Her eyes softened when she noticed my silence. She seemed almost grateful I didn't rush to fix what wasn't mine to fix. The warmth from her side of the bar reached me. Faint, but there. I could feel it in the small distance between our arms, the quiet magnetism of proximity. My hand rested on the counter, and hers wasn't far, just close enough that I could sense the heat of her skin. There was a heartbeat of hesitation, that invisible pause before a line is crossed, not in touch but in emotion. And then she exhaled, long and quiet. "You have kind eyes," she said softly. "The kind that don't look through people." That simple sentence landed heavier than it should have. I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who had spent years being admired but not seen. Before I could respond, she smiled faintly, as if taking back the vulnerability she'd just revealed. "Sorry," she murmured. "That sounded sentimental." "It sounded honest," I said. She didn't reply, but for the next few minutes, she didn't move her hand away either. The space between us was still filled with silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. It felt like something had begun there, quietly, between everything we didn't say. Time slipped away without either of us noticing. The bar had emptied slowly, one conversation at a time, until only a few quiet souls remained. The jazz had softened into a mellow instrumental, the kind of song that doesn't ask to be heard. It just stays in the air like a sigh. She checked her watch, a simple, elegant piece with a leather strap, the kind of detail that said she valued subtlety more than show. The movement was small, almost reluctant. I saw it before she even spoke. "I should probably go," she said gently. Her voice didn't carry regret, but something close to it. A tone that said she'd been here longer than she meant to, and maybe didn't mind. I nodded, trying to hide the hesitation that rose in me. "It's late," I said, even though the word felt heavier than I wanted it to. She smiled softly and reached for her coat, the same one she had folded neatly hours ago. She shook it out, her perfume stirring faintly through the air. A soft, warm scent that clung to the memory of the night. I stood up without thinking, as if my body already knew what respect looked like around her. She noticed, and for a second her expression changed. A flash of appreciation, quiet but unmistakable. "Thank you," she said, meeting my eyes. "For what?" "For seeing me." The words caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond to something that real, that direct. So I just held her gaze, letting the meaning settle in the space between us. She slipped her arms into her coat slowly, each movement unhurried, deliberate. The world outside the glass door was silvered with rain, the streetlights blurring in the reflection. She hesitated before leaving, fingertips grazing the counter, the same spot where her hand had almost touched mine earlier. When she turned toward the door, I thought that was it. But halfway there, she stopped, looked back. It wasn't a dramatic turn, no cinematic pause. Just a simple glance over her shoulder, quiet and human. But her eyes met mine, and for the second time that night, the world seemed to narrow to that single moment. Her expression held warmth, gratitude, and something else, something unspoken. The kind of look that says, if we met again, I wouldn't pretend this didn't mean something. She smiled, small, private, like a secret she was choosing to leave behind. And then she walked out. The door closed softly behind her, the rain swallowing her figure as she disappeared into the city. Her reflection lingered a moment longer on the glass before fading completely. I stood there, unsure how long I'd been frozen. The stool beside me was empty, but her presence hadn't left. It stayed, in the scent of cedar and warmth, in the faint print of her glass on the counter, in the echo of her laugh that still played in my head. Some people leave quietly, others, without trying, leave you a little less alone than they found you. She was both. The rain hadn't stopped when she left. If anything, it had grown steadier, the kind that made the street outside shimmer under the glow of passing headlights. I stayed where I was, sitting on that same stool, tracing the rim of my untouched drink the way she had done earlier. The bartender, maybe out of guilt or habit, slid another glass my way. "On the house," he said quietly. I nodded, though I didn't lift it. The drink didn't matter. The night had already given me something harder to swallow, that rare feeling of having witnessed something honest in a world too distracted to notice. The stool beside me was empty now, but it didn't feel like absence. It felt like residue, the warmth of her presence still lingering in the air, the faint scent of her perfume still threading through the space between memory and reality. I thought about the way she smiled, not to charm but to acknowledge. The way she carried silence like a second skin, unashamed of it. The way her voice had softened when she said, "Thank you for seeing me." That line replayed in my mind again and again, and each time it landed differently, heavier, truer. Maybe because I knew exactly what it felt like to go unseen. The truth is, I hadn't done anything extraordinary. I'd only noticed what everyone else ignored. But somehow that had been enough to change something in both of us. A quiet shift, small but undeniable. The rain outside blurred the glass, turning the city lights into watercolor smudges. I found myself wondering where she was now, walking to her car maybe, pausing at a red light, thinking about the same moment, maybe with the same hesitant ache that had settled in my chest. And yet I didn't feel regret. Not really. Some meetings aren't meant to last. Some are meant to remind you that connection doesn't always come with promises or endings. Sometimes it's just an exchange of presence, a brief spark between two lives that will probably never cross again, but leave a warmth that lingers long after. I finally took a sip of the drink. It was cold now, sharp against my tongue. But even then, it carried the taste of something I couldn't quite name. Bittersweet, like goodbye spoken without words. As I stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror behind the bar. For the first time in a long while, I looked awake. Not lonely, not restless, just aware. Outside, the rain met my shoulders like soft applause. The night smelled of wet concrete and possibility. And as I walked down the empty street, I realized that what she left me wasn't longing. It was presence. A reminder that even in the smallest moments, a look, a laugh, a single act of attention, two strangers can find something close to love without ever needing to name it. And maybe that's what it means to really see someone, to make them feel real again if only for a night.